Hi, my name's Sam Mickelson, founder of True Worth. We're a talent solutions business, so it's all about people. And that's why we created a podcast channel. We wanted to bring together members of our True Worth collective, our clients, candidates, generally anybody in tech that wants to come and talk about their experience as a person, products, platforms, or projects that they've been involved with. So you can find us on all of the normal podcast channels and platforms. Links to all of our socials are in the description. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you've got any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much and enjoy the episode.
Okay, Sarah, how are you doing?
Sam, how you doing? I'm all right, thank you.
Thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Listen, we've been talking over the last few weeks about what you do. We've been talking about the True Worth Collective, how we're trying to build this inclusive network of people that can offer, digital services, project management, business analysis. We're dealing with CTOs that are trying to overcome big digital transformation problems, challenges. And what we keep coming back to is people. And what was quite nice in the event that we did last week, we were talking about why or how companies can get it wrong. And Bjorn Johansson, who's part of our network, was talking about it's all very well bringing in different bits of technology and getting all the right people in place and processes, but it's about engaging the people. And that's where you come in, isn't it? You are that change management person that actually gets people going. Am I right?
Yeah, definitely. So I've worked in kind of in and around projects for many, many years, more than I'd like to
10
admit to.
years, 10 years
Yeah,
experience.
it's probably more than that, actually.
Is it?
I just try not to put too close of a number to it. But yeah, I think a lot of people think the answer to my prayers in business is to buy the new technology off the shelf and I'm going to open it out of its pretty box and it's all going to make our lives better. And actually, if you've not engaged the right people, if you've not found out what really are the problems that they're facing in the day-to-day lives, and getting your business to be as efficient as possible, you could just be attempting to stick a plaster on something that's much deeper, and it may not solve the problem at all. So yeah, being the person that does the talking and gets people to the table and make sure that are we doing the right thing here, and is this going to actually be the answer to your prayers or possibly going to be your worst nightmare? It's the best thing to do is to get that person in the room to make sure that the conversations are being had.
Absolutely. And you, as we just sort of touched on, okay, you said you actually got more than 10 years experience, but you've worked with on digital products, on projects, change management across financial services, shared services, retail, supply chain. You've worked for well-known retailers that we would all know, like Morrisons, the Co-op, and also Walmart. And more recently, you've kind of segued back into it's still kind of retail, but it's more from a consultancy point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've been a consultant for many years, but under someone else's business essentially. And so doing that, I've worked with some massive names, delivering projects for them. And yeah, a couple of years ago, I decided it was time to kind of do things my own way. So I went into consultancy myself, worked with a few smaller businesses and helping with some of their challenges. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, but it's definitely one that I'm glad that I've started on.
Good, excellent. And because do you think that your role as a change management consultant anyway, whether you're going into a company in a permanent role or whether you're going in contract, do you think it just sort of lends itself to that type of work where you've got to kind of win people over quickly?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, because I have worked as a consultant for many years when I've been delivering projects, even though I was employed by a firm of consultants at the time, you've only got a limited amount of time to make an impact. So if your statement of work covers a year or 2 years, if you've not made an impact and not given some positive return within that period of time, you're not likely to see a renewal on that contract.
Yeah.
So one of the absolutely key things that I really, really believe in is that your relationships are worth so much when it comes to those kinds of things. So being able to go in quickly and make, positive changes in terms of the business, but also build the relationships with the stakeholders so that you are the trusted advisor in there and you can, work with that customer's best interests at heart. I think that really, really helps to have that mindset from the very beginning, even if you are going in as a full-time employee, because you want to deliver value and you want to be of service, regardless of whether you're, a consultant or not.
Yeah, and I think it's massively important to get that winning people over bit like really, really nailed down, isn't it? And that we're going to be talking about obviously the importance of what you do, stakeholder management. And that's just really one part of what you do, isn't it, Sarah? There's so many other things that we could probably talk about. But I think that today we'll cover a few things around sort of winning trust with internal stakeholders. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence and why that's so important. Naturally, we're going to talk about Agile versus Waterfall. I think that's something that you've come across more recently. We're also going to talk about workshops and what makes a good workshop. We're going to hear about what you've learnt working for different businesses, both UK and US retailers, and if there is a bit of a difference. And we're also going to touch on the key differences between managing those internal customers and stakeholders and external suppliers or external stakeholders. And also something that's really, I think, relevant nowadays more than ever, it's managing those fractional teams and having to juggle not always being able to be on site and having to do a lot of stuff over Teams and Zoom and things like this. So there's quite a lot to unbox there, isn't there? But I want to stress that this is just one element of what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like that we've kind of touched on, I've spent so long around particularly retail and supply chain data. I could talk to you for hours and hours about the purchase order process, for example, and accounts payable and receivable data and things like that, which are very specific to retail. But I know in the collective we've got some absolute wizards when it comes to data, and data isn't actually my strongest suit. Relationships and customer management is definitely the thing that I'm most passionate about. So yeah, it is just one aspect of what I do, but it is something that I'm really, really passionate to talk about.
And tell us what else you're passionate about away from work. Tell us what you get up to when you're not managing stakeholders. What else are you managing?
Yeah, well, yeah. So when I'm not managing stakeholders, yeah, so the basic level is that there's me, my husband, and 2 animal children, a cat and a dog. So I'm managing that relationship quite closely at the moment. The cat's been an only child for 12 years, and he's got a puppy as of 1 year old to contend
Oh,
with now. So
really? Okay. How's
that's
that going?
it's funny actually, because I was thinking about a subject for a podcast being how learning to communicate with a dog. How to communication with your stakeholders. So maybe that's a podcast for another day.
Yeah.
Of clearness and conciseness of your communication. But yeah, so that's one part of my life that I have to manage quite closely as well.
And you're based in Yorkshire, aren't you? So a lot of the clients you've worked with have been those retailers in and around the north of England, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely. So Leeds, Bradford, Manchester. Generally, there's always a presence in London. But then again, because I've worked in consultancy for so long, I've done remote working for many, many, many years. That's not a new thing to me at all. I've done that for the past decade. So yeah, people out in the States or in Hong Kong, yeah, it's just you kind of just adapt to the way of working to make sure you're online for a smallish window of time together. But yeah, it's just kind of par for the course, I think, when you're working consultancy, that you have to spread yourself across various time zones and customers around the world.
I can imagine following the sun and all of that.
Yeah.
So let's kick off then, and let's talk about that initial. You've just landed a contract, or you just started a contract. It's day one, and you're on site, and you've got to go and engage with some stakeholders. What do you do first of all? How do you go about winning over, or not winning over, but just sort of winning trust with people? Where do you start?
Yeah, and I know it's a really sort of famous phrase in sales, which is you've got to get the know, like, and trust of your customers. And I hate just spitting out a bit of sales jargon, but it's really true. But you don't have to do it in such a salesy way. I think if you just genuinely care about and want to help your customers, that just happens organically without you having to give it that much thought. If there's one tip I would ever give anyone when it comes to building relationships, is you really don't build the same relationship over the phone to what you do on a video call, over a video call to what you do by sitting in person and having a coffee together. You 10x your output by just sitting together in a room, even if you only can do it once a month or once a quarter, which sometimes what we did with clients that are out in the States, for example. It's worth it. It's well worth it to get the relationship of actually working together, and you get to know each other just a little bit better. So that's definitely one of my kind of top tips, is to be present, just to be there as much as you can. It'll definitely help in terms of just building the relationship much quicker than if you try to just do it over email, for instance. Very difficult to build a relationship over email. So yeah, that would definitely be my first suggestion to anybody, is to get that FaceTime if you can.
And I guess it depends on the type of project, or where you are in the project. If it's kind of if the project's failing, maybe, or the last person that was kind of doing what you're doing has kind of pissed a few people off, or the consultancy you're working for has made a few mistakes, that can be quite tricky, I guess. How do you sort of handle situations where it's not quite going so well?
Yeah, so it's funny actually, because quite a lot of what I've done in the past is following something bad that's happened, and then I've gone in afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's usually where a relationship's broken down somewhere along the line. So in those situations, again, getting FaceTime, you just can't overstate how important that is. But listen, really listen, and care about what people, because they're going to be ranting probably and raving and saying, and here's another thing you did wrong, or and your company did this. There's just no point in trying to push back on those comments, because you're just going to create more of an argument. You've just got to listen and see it from that person's point of view, that they feel failed in some way, whether they're right or they're wrong. Their perception is that they've been let down, they've been failed. So you just need to listen to them very, very carefully and understand, where is that concern coming from? What has happened? What was the root cause of the problem that's caused the breakdown? And just really care about giving them a better service. I think in the world of project management, because it's not an ongoing relationship, you come and do a project, there's a start, there's a middle, there's an end, and then you'll probably move on to something else. The relationship part, as the ongoing, sometimes gets forgotten about. Because I tend to do a lot of projects where I hand it over to a BAU, so implementing new software, for example. You need to hand that over in a fantastic state, so that in the BAU world, when the functional stakeholders and managers are dealing with that customer, they're coming to them as a happy customer, not a customer who's already angry before they get into the BAU process.
I can imagine that, and that must be, so that effectively then is a lot of legwork that you have to do then to make sure the handover's perfect, and then you need to have that legacy there for the project to be handed over to the right person, and it's going to be looked after.
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest things that I think is super important when it comes to that kind of a project where you're handing it over to someone, is to make sure that just the little things go a long way. So say 2 weeks before handover, there's some communications that go around so everyone knows, okay, this is what's happening on this day, and this is where you can find your documentation, and there's some walkthrough videos here. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of recording walkthrough videos at the moment. It's just another way. We used to just produce reams of documents, didn't we, back in the day?
The
Whereas now
technology is so much better for that these days, isn't it?
exactly. And you don't need to be a genius to just record a 5-minute clip. You can use Teams, you can use Zoom, just open a meeting with yourself, record your screen and just talk as you're doing it.
Yeah.
People taking information in different ways. Some people will want to read it. Actually, I'm one of the people that want to read it because I just want to get to the point. But then I might go back and watch the video afterwards. So it's always good to have those different ways to give that information to people so that when you do come to the handover, they will inevitably have questions. And that's why a hypercare period is always good, just to do a little bit of hand holding before you take the stabilizers off and let them go. But
I like that.
having the comms is
I like
better.
what you said there, hypercare.
Yeah.
Where's that from then?
Yeah, so I think it's fairly sort of common terminology in terms of when you've released a piece of software, or you've got to the point where it's technically the end of the project as it was, and you're handing over to the next team to take it on. So probably a functional team in the world of business as usual are going to carry on maintaining and managing that customer relationship. The hypercare periods there, you tend to set a period of time, and it depends on the project as to how long that could be. 2 to 4 weeks is usually average, I would say. It does depend on the type of project though, because it could be longer if you needed. And it's just to make sure that there's someone there available, so when people forget how to log in, you can help them to help themselves. So you tell them how to do it rather than fixing it for them. If there were any bugs in production, you get on them quickly because you're still in that hypercare period. You get them sorted out quickly and back out to the customer so that it doesn't cause them any downtime. And it's just that period of time where you've not fully stood down the project team. You're still being there, being extremely supportive, and just making sure that you're on hand if there are any questions or concerns, or people are getting a little bit stuck. It might be that you need to do a couple of workshops at that point to kind of say, what's the feedback, how are you finding it after week 1, week 2, just to make sure that experience of the customer the whole way through is a positive one. It's not just you handed over and you left us to our own devices and then we didn't know what to do.
So it's a really thorough process, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the best projects are the ones where you do that sort of thorough customer care all the way through to the end, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you think your business is. It doesn't matter if your business is selling groceries or if your business is moving freight around the world or whatever your business is. You're a customer business at the end of the day. And you have internal customers as much as you have external customers. So if you can't get that bit right, you're not going to do well in this world of business. So I think that's something that is really cool in terms of the way I approach things, is that I really put that first amongst everything else to make sure that everyone's getting the best service possible.
What comes across when you're talking there, you mentioned a few things where you mentioned care for the customer, being quite genuine about it. And it feels like you've got that care, that passion for the industry. How did you get into retail and supply chain in the first place? Can you sort of just, wind back a little bit to think when you started in doing this?
I can actually. So I started, actually my career started out of university as an intelligence analyst in law enforcement. So I worked for West Yorkshire Police as an intelligence analyst. And I truly loved that job. I really, really did. I loved making a difference and feeling like I was doing something that was really valuable. The only reason I left that job was there was a restructure going on, and I was fairly confident that there were going to be some redundancies coming. And because it was on kind of a points system or something like that at the time, length of service was very important. And I was a new graduate, so I had no length of service at all. So I put my CV on, I think it was a job board from like 15 years ago or something.
Right.
And within a couple of days, someone contacted me and asked me if I'd ever heard of recovery audit. And I said,
Okay.
no. And they said, do you want to find out? And I said, oh, why not? And so
Um,
I went to meet a guy who I'm still very, very good friends with, who essentially used my analytical skills to bring me into managing audit projects for these retail customers. So through there, I got to work with lots and lots of retailers. Did a fair bit of public sector as well, but mostly retail was kind of my thing, because it was a very intense customer relationship and the projects were long. So the projects would be sort of a year-ish, and then you would obviously pitch for the next project to do the next sort of X number of years.
Got you.
And the whole cycle would repeat itself if you were successful. So
Um,
yeah,
um,
so that's
um,
sort of how I got into it.
and what for people that don't know, and I'm one of them. What is recovery audit then?
Yeah, so recovery audit, it's something that is done by all kinds of businesses really. Grocery retail is just one of them, but there's all kinds of industries looking at the transactions between the business and their suppliers and making sure that they've been executed correctly. So where there have been overpayments and undercharges and things like that, going back and rectifying them. So it means collecting huge amounts of data essentially and turning them into bespoke auditing software. So that's kind of how I got quite into the data side of things and really understanding supply chain and retail data very, very well, because you've got to kind of pull all these different facets of the commercial relationship together.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. And that's where your analytical skills came into play.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
you moved more into sort of change management then over those years.
Yeah. So from doing that, I ended up then moving more into a very strange job title, but business development. But actually, it was an onboarding manager. So
Right.
onboarding customers into new pieces of software. So it was in the similar sort of industry, but where it was software as a service as opposed to the traditional audit projects. So it would involve working with a lot of, this is where there were kind of more public sector involved as well, lots and lots of kind of finance stakeholders, sometimes commercial, a lot of procurement stakeholders as well, to kind of make sure that they were in a position to be able to share data, going through sort of infosec and things like that. And just kind of taking them through the whole process of onboarding them into the software, helping them use it, being able to show them how to use the outputs from the software to be able to change their business processes and things like that.
So you were then sort of in that eye of the storm of being able to understand what the client's overall objectives were, what they're trying to achieve, and then being able to actually be that middle person between tech teams and what they're trying to achieve and helping them get there, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's a bit of I think it's always been a bit of a strange role that I've done really, because I've come from an analytical background, but I don't consider myself a business analyst.
Mm.
But yeah, essentially that's right, being the person that can kind of translate, if you like, what the customer's trying to achieve to people who are actually technically able to onboard them into the software, because that's not me, I'm not the technical person, and be able to actually have that conversation to make those things work together. So yeah, that does bring me kind of at the eye of the storm, as you say.
And that brings us to talking about emotional intelligence, I think, because it feels like you've come from this analytical kind of role into a more customer facing role, business development. You're starting to learn about sales. And I think when you any role where you've got to work with people, I think you need a high degree of emotional intelligence. So bringing that now to your current position and what you're doing day to day, obviously it's important, but why is it so important in the role that you do now, Sarah?
Yeah, well, I think part of being emotionally intelligent is obviously not about yourself, it's about other people. And being able to pick up on people's cues that they give you that are potentially non-verbal. So you can tell if there's resistance, because there's always resistance to change. Just need to accept that it will be there.
Yeah.
Even the person that thinks they're very open to change, there will be some resistance at some point. And some people find it hard to express what that is. It's more just the feeling that they have. So I think by being really emotionally aware, you can identify resistance. You might not be able to know what it is, but you can identify where you're getting resistance. So it might be as simple as someone never answers their emails. It
Yeah.
might be
Welcome to
someone,
my world.
yeah, there's always the one person that never answers their emails. But yeah, it's something like that, or it just can be certain things said in passing. It might be, certain turns of phrase that they do, like, I'm not putting my name to that. It shows you that they're fearful about something.
Yeah.
It might not be the change itself. It might be, I'm fearful for my job security. Therefore, I don't want to be associated with a change, because change is risk. There's always risk. You can't say that there isn't. You can minimize it as much as you like, but it's there. And so just by being emotionally aware, you can try and find different ways to connect with that stakeholder, and make sure that, especially if they're a key stakeholder and you need their participation,
Yeah.
to make sure that you are really making an effort on that know, like, and trust. You might need to find different ways. This is where the physical coffee, or maybe even something a bit stronger, might be worthwhile, because you can just spend time with the person and get to understand what their drivers are, what their fears are, what they like.
Yeah.
And the way they like to be communicated to. And so if you bring all those things together, it helps you bring your stakeholders along with you on that journey, even though there might be some resistance there.
It reminds me very much of recruitment and how we work as recruiters, because we are having to ask questions, listen to feedback, understand and spot those social cues, know when to kind of back off a candidate or a client to, not make them feel uncomfortable, but help them to make a decision. And it feels quite similar in a way, to kind of pick up when there's a bit of resistance, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Because
Yeah.
especially if the resistance is manifesting itself in lack of engagement, it can prevent you from getting your requirements gathered. It can prevent you from being able to give user stories to your developers. It can prevent you from being able to make any kind of positive movement towards getting the project done. So it's super important to make sure that you don't have to confront it in a, why are you not answering my emails kind of way, because that's just going to get more resistance. It's about nurturing the relationship, and yeah, by being aware and having that sensitivity to how people are feeling, especially when there's change. It just helps you to get things moving along, and it helps them to buy into the success of the project as well, which
Yeah.
is also really important in it actually being successful.
I bet it does. I bet it does. It was funny actually the other night when we attended an event in Manchester, and Bjorn, who's part of the collective and is in the network, he was at the event talking about digital transformation projects, and he had a brilliant analogy on any project that you're looking to deliver, no matter what it is. Try and think of it like you're building a house for your family, and whether you've got to engage with your partner, obviously, and also your children. You've got to engage with what it is that they want. And he kind of likened that to sitting down with stakeholders, and not just the board, but all of your stakeholders across the business, no matter at what level they're at, to understand what they want from this change, this technology, this solution. And it feels a little bit like that with what you're saying. It's not just winning them over, but it's actually making them feel part of the process, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree with that more. I know we're going to talk a little bit about internal and external stakeholders, and that would definitely be something that I would echo, that I once did a management training course. Oh, this is a long time ago as well, but it was one of the sort of ones where you go and stay on a residential and you
Right.
have to do tasks in order to earn your dinner, and then you have to cook the dinner with the help of the kind of resident chef so you don't burn the place down. And then you've kind of got to serve it and stuff like that as part of your this management training. And I always remember you learn best from when you do something wrong, right?
Yeah, of course
I
you do.
always
Yeah.
remember I thought we'd bossed this particular task because the dinner was made, the dinner was on the table, and everything was brilliant. And then we got some feedback at the end saying the chef wasn't very happy with us. And I was absolutely mortified because we'd forgotten he was a stakeholder. And I was heartbroken. I thought we'd done so well, and we hadn't. We'd done terribly. We hadn't done terribly, to be fair, but I felt like we had. But yeah, I would never forget how mortified I was that we'd forgotten that he was a stakeholder. It was when I was very young on my management journey, and it's one of those things that has stuck with me ever since. To not forget the users, the people that you never speak to. What do they really want? Because you always have the sort of front facing person at the customer that you'll speak to all the time, but what does the person that's sat 2 desks away think?
Yeah.
And if you don't find out, that could come and bite you. So yeah, definitely agree on the
And
finding out what the kids want.
yeah, and it is absolutely that. You think about moving house these days, you sort of don't, your kids don't get involved, but really they should do, and they should have an active part in where they're gonna, which room they're gonna have and stuff like that. It's really important. So then let's jump then to talking about managing those internal versus external stakeholders. How often is that something that you're involved with? How often do you see that, and how often do you have to get involved?
Constantly.
Yeah.
Because I do sort of consider myself as a client facing PM, if you like,
Yeah.
or whatever it is that I do. I always sit at the junction between reporting to the internal stakeholders, reporting to the board, to the sponsor, and also to the external customer as well. I like it. I wouldn't want it to be any other way. I love being with customers. It's the thing that I enjoy about my job more than anything. It's important to know your stakeholders, which is much like the analogy of knowing what the kids want versus what your partner wants and stuff when
Yeah.
you're building the house. Because if you extrapolate that analogy, you've got your partner and your kids to think about, but what space do you need for the dog? And what about the suppliers? What about the bricklayers? What does he need? And what about the glazer? When's he going to come round? And what about the neighbors who don't want you to have that extension built on the back? And
Yeah.
all these people have got different agendas, and they're not necessarily conflicting, although they might be. But it might mean there needs to be some kind of negotiation and a meeting of minds to get everyone working together to an ending that's good for everybody. So yeah, definitely knowing your stakeholders and knowing what is important to them. So what you report to the internal board is not necessarily what you're going to report to the customer, because they've got different drivers. There's different things that are important to them. And understanding how they like to digest that information. Boards tend to like sort of one-page reports with an exec summary, maybe a little bit more detail underneath. The customer wants something completely different, and they're more likely to just want to know, okay, if the timeline's this long, so a foot long, if if you want to describe how far apart my hands are, how far along that path are we? That what is left to do in the remaining time. Is it going to be done? What the customer is interested in, and what the board are interested in are very different. So yeah, knowing who you're talking to, what it is that they're interested in, how to have the conversations with them. It'll help build the relationship because you're helping them understand things in a way that's important to them.
Yeah.
But it also means that further down the line, you're not going to have those breakdowns where people are saying, you didn't give me information, or you didn't include me in that conversation, because you've tried to think about everybody and bring everyone to the table.
Yeah, really important, isn't it? Really important.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't really be understated how important it is to just make sure that everyone's involved and everyone gets the opportunity to speak about what they want, what they're concerned about, and then you can work through that kind of together as a group, rather than waiting until it becomes a problem.
Totally agree. And again, this fits in so nicely to the series of podcasts that we're doing, and how it fits in with Bjorn's kind of helicopter view of a project, but stressing the importance of this thing, and then going macro, I should say, into this and how it works and what are the nuts and bolts of it. So this is really good, Sarah, really good. Talking then, we've talked about the importance of winning trust. We've talked about emotional intelligence. You've worked for these big, retailers, and we said some of them are UK, US. Do you see a big difference? And before you answer that, I think we as Brits, I guess, we kind of see the US very differently, don't we? A bit sort of, maybe overly familiar or overly friendly. But I know, having visited the US many times, that customer service, it's in their DNA almost.
Yeah.
Did you find that archetype shining through when you worked for that US retailer versus the UK? And could you expand on maybe some of the differences that you've seen yourself?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, because one of the first things that springs to mind of the most noticeable difference that I was aware of working with teams out in the States, is that a lot less of them had their cameras on than anyone in the UK. At the point where we were working from home during lockdown. And I don't know if that was as a result of them feeling less comfortable with sharing their backgrounds. I'm a big fan of not having a fake background on. I'm confident and happy to sit in my spare bedroom,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
now my office,
Yeah.
and happy to sit here and let you in, because
Yeah.
I'm totally comfortable with that. Whereas I got the feeling that potentially a lot of other people didn't like that level of almost intrusion of people being able to see into their houses. So I found that the UK was much more likely to have a camera on than, actually, it's not just the States. I work with clients out in Spain as well, and
Right.
they don't have cameras on either.
Really? Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, I think potentially some kind of cultural differences there in terms of having cameras on whilst working from home was
Yeah.
quite interesting. But the customer satisfaction point that you mentioned is that is really interesting, because one of the biggest sort of things that I took away from working really, really close with teams out in the States is that CSAT, or customer satisfaction,
Okay.
to the likes of you and I,
Like
their
it. Yeah.
CSAT scores were one of their project success metrics.
Right.
If their project was considered successful because it hit the schedule, it hit the budget, it hit the required quality, but the CSAT scores were poor, that was considered failure.
Really?
Yeah, so it was taken extra, and these were internal customers. This was an internal onboarding onto a new piece of software. So this wasn't even an external customer. These were all internal customers. And it was that important to them. So
Yeah.
even non-response on the customer satisfaction surveys was considered to be a poor result. Not a failure, but was a poor result.
Yeah.
And then obviously poor feedback, what was clearly not good. So yeah, it was actually built into the performance metrics of their projects to have an element of customer satisfaction, and regular surveys sent out sort of on a monthly basis, asking about everything, relating to the project or the perceived responsiveness of, for example, help desk where it related to the project, and things like that. So yeah, they take it very, very seriously.
And I'm not going to say the obvious. Do we not take it seriously in the UK? I'm sure we do, but is it not at the same level then?
Yeah, I think we definitely do take it seriously in the UK, and especially obviously projects where you're dealing with external customers. I think where we possibly miss a trick is completely integrating it as part of the performance metrics. We're very, very good on making sure we're hitting our budgets and things like that. We tend to forget a little bit about that customer feedback, and including that in our performance metrics for, whether it's a project or whether it's kind of the business as usual, because it works in both. It's something that I think we could do a lot better on here in the UK, to just really integrate that into the work that we do.
Interesting. Now we talked about Agile versus Waterfall. I remember when we were placing project managers into projects, and it was all Prince and SSADM and structured methods, and it was Waterfall, but it was had to be so regimented. I think that because technology is where it is now, because it feels like every project is more of a product. I think that the US have led the way a bit with Silicon Valley and apps being developed the way they are. And by the very nature of you being able to update your apps all the time, that's kind of led to an agile approach to everything, hasn't it? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think I haven't experienced anyone that's been absolutely sort of regimented on being, for example, Prince 2, outside of the public sector. And I haven't worked directly with the public sector as much as I have with sort of commercial and retail customers. But it does seem to be that that's where it's kind of hanging on. But I think even then, there's a kind of a realization that projects, when you take so long to get started, it's more often than not, the customers don't really know what they want at the start. They need to
Yeah.
see a little bit of something,
Yeah.
and then they'll realize what is really important to them. So the sort of big drawback with the sort of waterfall way of doing things is that you have this huge lag at the start, with loads and loads and loads of planning. And by the time you've actually started to deliver anything, the customer requirements might have become clearer and therefore change. And that's something that's then, in that waterfall environment, really not good.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of really constrained, and change is something that's to be avoided like the plague. Whereas in the agile way of working, you accept that there will be change. That's part of the development process and part of delivering. The thing that I think, when you're a customer focused project manager as well, you thrive on delivering something, and you want to deliver value, and that's as you as a person delivering value and also delivering them a product that does something and works. If it takes forever to get them anything because you've got to wait until you've got through all the stage gates and things like that, it's not the most satisfying project to work on, let's say. What I would say is that when you're doing kind of a client facing implementation project, which is the sort of thing that I do more than anything, there is a element of waterfall to it, I suppose, because there has to be a date. They have to know when they're going live. They have to know what the hypercare period is going to look like. They need to have training in place and make sure that people have manuals and support and things like that. So there is an element of waterfall, because you're working towards a date, and you need to kind of make sure that you've got things in place to achieve that date before you can go live with whatever the software is. But it doesn't prevent you from having that more agile approach to the actual development to get that done incrementally, so that you're building up as opposed to just having this big bang.
And it's it's interesting that you talk about the public sector and how that has a different mentality to private sector companies you've worked for. I remember at the start of lockdown and sort of 6 months into lockdown, I worked with a lot of people in the NHS, and the amount of people that told me, well, do you know what? We've been looking at Microsoft Teams as an example for 2 years. We've had to implement it in a week, and in fact, less than a week, and we've done it. And so many projects, NHS professionals delivered so many tech projects in that 18-month period. And I remember speaking to lots of project managers and sort of senior level people that said, we've delivered so much tech in the last 6 to 8 months that we just wouldn't have done pre-COVID. It would have the things that would have taken 2 years at least to deliver. We've done it in 13 weeks, and we've surprised ourselves. And this particular gentleman said to me, I think the NHS is now changed forever, because they now can see what's possible and what can be done in a very, very short space of time. And it is just get that MVP out and tweak and change and tweak and change. And that's kind of a lot of what's happened. I feel like anyway, that COVID has kind of accelerated that and it's changed that mentality slightly, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And actually, when I think back to my my interview for West Yorkshire Police, I do remember there being a question on there saying, because obviously whilst it is a desk job, there can be moments when it's incredibly high pressure when your job is on, so to speak, and you need to get things done very, very quickly. And so I remember the question being asked as to, if the chief inspector comes and he needs a report from you in the next hour, and you have to decide what to sacrifice to give him what he needs, what do you sacrifice? And ultimately the correct answer is you just give him the information on a flipping fag packet if you're after. You give him it however he needs it, but it just needs the information. It doesn't have to be on a printed report. It doesn't matter if it's branded. It doesn't have to have a video that goes with it. It just needs the information, because someone's life might be at risk. And so they know when times are, in case of emergencies, like during the pandemic, they have got the capacity to be able to switch that thinking and to deliver at pace and stop being so wasteful.
Yeah.
But in normal times, I do have a lot of sympathy for them. For my sins, I was a school governor for about 4 years, even though I don't have children.
Oh, right. Okay.
Just to help out in the local community. I was a school governor for 4 years. And the amount of scrutiny as to how you're spending that budget, down to the last pound, having to review contract after contract for gas and electricity and water every year, because you might say 50 pence. I do understand when it's public money, it is difficult, and they have got to prove that they've done due diligence, things like that. But it does make the process awfully wasteful at the start when they're spending 2 years thinking about something instead of acting. So yeah.
Well, I was going to, I'd reiterate that. Again, a sort of a COVID anecdote. When I was working at another company, and we were talking to a lot of senior level stakeholders in the NHS. And again, I think it was the sort of CTO of a big, I think it was a council or a trust. It might be a trust. And he had been campaigning to pay for Microsoft Teams for so long, and they eventually got it. And he looked at the expenses on just meetings pre-COVID to what it had been in the 18 months over COVID, when still, we private sector were back in offices. The NHS still weren't. They were still working from home. But the amount of meetings they were doing over Teams and the amount of money they were saving from people traveling to different sites, it was frightening to hear about it and think, well, okay, well, this is it now. We have gone beyond the debate of can I work from home, and am I going to be effective? I think we're talking a lot about that at the moment. It feels like a lot of people talking about the 4-day working week, flexibility, trust. They're talking a lot about how your working contract is going to change if you work from home, and no software to manage what you're doing, which is amazing, really, to where we were. I don't think we'd be having these conversations if it wasn't for COVID.
Yeah, definitely not.
And I think also talking about how to manage those people working remotely. So when I'm talking to companies now and people about jobs, we've still got this kind of pushback from people who, well, I've been working from home all this time. I want to continue working from home, but there is a danger that people will be left a bit isolated, and there's HR have got to think about people's mental health being at home, and I think that's got to change. And this leads us to our sort of almost our final point, really, isn't it? It's about fractional teams and how you engage going through a change management project like this. How have you found it yourself? And how do you, what do you see works and what doesn't work?
Yeah, so like I said, I'd used remote teams for ages, with me always working remotely for customers well before lockdown. So the biggest difference was that we did a lot of conference calls back then, and not necessarily video calls. We had a few video calls, but the other people didn't have a video back then, so it was a one-way street. So having group video calls and making sure that unless there's some real reason why not, to get people's cameras turned on, because I'm no angel. If my camera's not turned on, there's a very good chance I'll get distracted, because someone will email you or someone will Teams chat you, and you'll just look. And once you've just looked, you're gone. You've lost at least 10 minutes of the conversation. So I think getting people on a video call when you're in, imagine you're in different parts of the world, on a video call with cameras on, it just keeps people engaged. But it does help, if you are just having, for example, a stand-up meeting in the morning to say what you're working on, or anything you're stuck with, just being able to see people. It just helps so much in terms of seeing if people look like they're struggling, just looking at people's body language. It helps them build the relationship, because when you're onboarding new team members, they can feel so not part of the team if they're not able to see them when they're in calls and meetings and things like that. So definitely getting cameras on is a massive plus if you can do it at all. I do really think that where possible, you should try and get together in a room. I just think the work that can be done, not in terms of, right, I'm going to sit down and I want to write code, or I'm going to write raid logs, or I'm going to write requirements for this next solid 6 hours. It's more about the bouncing of ideas around that cannot be done when you're sitting at home. Co-working sessions are all right, but there's a tendency again for people to mute themselves, and they don't speak when they're just thinking about something. Whereas when you're sitting around a room working together, there is that just a minute, I was just wondering about that thing. Can I just ask you? And it's just that sharing of ideas and sharing of inspiration that makes such a big difference when it comes to a team working together and really pulling together to get the project delivered on time. So I definitely think they're kind of some good ways of working. One of the real things that I've noticed when it's so when we're talking about fractional teams, is not just about being physically not located in the same place, but actually working on different projects. So it's not a dedicated project team. They're just a pool of resource, and you can dip in and out of them when there is a priority to do work for you or other projects. So I think that the real key thing with that is just being aware of the whole portfolio of priorities, in addition to what every project you're working on, because there'll always be something else that's happening. It's very unlikely that there's only one project going on at once. So just to make sure that in those situations where there are other priorities within the business, that you're not accidentally over-promising when there's not the resource or not the capacity there to deliver, to make sure that you've got the resources lined up to be able to actually complete what you need them to do within the timescales that you've got available to you. So yeah, being able to manage kind of the time when people are not dedicated to the project is kind of another thing to keep in mind as well.
And how do you pick up when somebody's struggling and they're working remotely? Is that quite hard to do?
It can be. We tend to have daily stand-ups, so just 15 minutes, just to say what you worked on yesterday, what you're doing today, and anything that you're stuck on. It's a good point just to kind of visually and verbally check in with everyone, to just be able to see if someone looks like they're struggling, if someone's body language or their tone of voice is suggesting that they're getting frustrated, they're asking the same questions multiple times, and seeming to get nowhere or taking a lot longer to do tasks than they initially said. They're just kind of the little things that I might think that they just need checking in on, and just make sure that everything's going all right. Because with the best will in the world, certain people won't speak up in a group. They just never will. And they need you to reach out to them, because it might be an hour or two after that stand-up meeting that they think, oh, I'm really stuck and I don't know what to do. And I've been trying really hard to figure it out. And they need someone to kind of step in and say, shall we find you someone who can help? Maybe I know someone, maybe I can speak to the developers, or, line you up with someone who can maybe answer that question for you. So I think things like that, and just having the different kind of check-ins. So whether it's a small short meeting with a full group, or just being able to check in one by one with people to make sure that if there's something they'd rather ask you privately, they've got the opportunity to do so as well. They're all kind of good ways to just make sure everyone's staying on track.
That's good. I like that. Brilliant. Now, I come to the sort of the end of the podcast a little bit, or the end of this one at least. And first of all, thank you for giving me the time. It's a Monday evening, and we should be having tea and watching, I don't know, Star Corrie or something like that. But thank you for your time, Sarah. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
What advice would you give, young Sarah from 10 plus years ago, when she's deciding what she wants to do and where she wants her career to go? And I guess that's a question to, your younger self, but also at the same time, I guess it's advice to anybody else in a similar situation. Maybe you bump into a neighbor and that neighbor says, well, yeah, my son or my daughter is looking to, get into analytics or data or tech or project management. What advice would you give them, knowing what you know now, to take into their sort of, career or their first role and decide which way they want to go?
Yeah, so I think I've probably got a few different kind of bits of advice. I think the first one is to try and spend as much time with people who have done what you want to do as you can. If it's not paid work experience, whatever you have to do, just a little bit of time to just get a feel for what it is that the people are doing in the field that you want to go in. I've worked a lot with having placement students working with me. So they've taken a year out of university and come and work with me for a year. Some of those students have gone on after graduation to get the most incredible careers. And I'm incredibly proud of them all. They just came and did a year working in industry, and spent a year with me and my teams, and it's such an amazing way to get really, really valuable real world experience. So that's quite a practical tip of something that would be really good to do. I think the probably the other one is a bit more of a kind of mindset tip almost. It's something that someone told me actually when they were getting made redundant of all things. And it was someone in my team. They were removing a layer of middle management in a role that I was doing, and so he reported into me.
Mm.
And he was my best sort of team manager. And I was absolutely heartbroken that he was being made. Well, he'd elected, he'd taken voluntary redundancy. And I was absolutely heartbroken that I was losing him, and I was really, really worried about him. Because to me at the time, redundancy was like the worst thing in the world. I couldn't think of anything more terrifying than not having a job. And he wasn't bothered at all. And he just said to me, I'm always going to bet on myself. I'll be fine. And I was like, that is the most amazing mindset to have. Just bet on yourself. You're resourceful. You can do it. Don't worry that, maybe you should have had, done a degree in this, or you should have gone and tried to get a job with that company. Just, you've got what it takes to be whatever you want to be. So if there's anyone that's kind of looking at, their career right now and thinking, I hate it, I'm not happy, I don't want to do this anymore, but it's the only thing I've ever done and I'm worried, don't be. Just do what you've got to do to make it work for you. So yeah, I definitely think there's a bit of a mindset piece there as well.
That's brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to how you've been brought up, who
Yeah.
you're influenced by, and obviously, your parents and stuff like that. But I think kids in school these days, I've got 3 children, one grown up who's not really a child anymore. He's like old Jamie, who's 28. And I'd be lecturing him a lot. And he looks back on it now, and with fond memory, he tells me of, Dad, you always do telling me this, do this, be. And I always used to say, just be better than me, and you can be who, whatever you want to be. I've got a 15-year-old daughter now who's, halfway through her GCSEs, and I'm really struggling to know what she wants to do. And I guess in the tech industry, we know the stats are very, very, heavily weighted towards men.
Yeah.
We want to have a more diverse industry, but I think tech still has that, unfair view that you need to be a techie to be in tech, and I don't think you do these days, do you?
No,
You can transition, and you can be in project management or business analysis if you're not technically minded to be able to do coding or programming. Fair enough, but there's so much more that you can do, isn't there?
yeah, definitely. And it's quite appropriate that you brought that up on the week of International Women's Day.
Of course,
I'm sure that it was very deliberate.
absolutely.
But yeah, it's yeah, you definitely don't. I mean, when I was 15, I wanted to be an actress. I still starting to do a little bit. So, I'm sure there's hope for me yet. I went to university, I studied history because my dad wanted me to be a lawyer and go and get a nice steady job for the council. I wanted to do something artistic. And we kind of met in the middle because I liked history, I liked stories. So I went to do history, and I was at university thinking, what on earth am I going to do when I finish? Because I don't want to be a teacher, and I've not made it as an actress yet. So what am I going to do? But I love people's stories, and I love people, and I love working with people. So that's kind of how I ended up at the police, to help people. And so that's my dad, funnily enough, was an IT manager. I had no desire to go into IT at all, because I'm not interested in the I probably could have done coding if I wanted to, but I just wasn't interested in it. But I've come to it from a completely different way, which is about making customers happy and making people's lives better through giving them tech. So you don't have to be techie at all. You just have to understand what people's problems are and listen to them and try and speak that to someone who does understand the tech but doesn't understand the customer. And if you can be that person, you can have a fantastic career in tech, without ever being able to write a SQL query or be able to write a bit of code or do anything like that at all. So yeah, there's plenty of time to figure out what your daughter wants to do. She's only 15. She'll be fine.
And that is a brilliant way to end the podcast. Thank you so much. And you're right. She is only 15 and she doesn't need to work it out just yet. And I'm kind of probably like your dad. I just want her to be happy and successful in whatever she does. And I've taken the approach. We're going a bit off piste here, but that's okay. And I've taken the approach or the mindset of, and I said this to her a couple of years ago, you know, when she started talking about what GCSE she was going to choose. And I just said, because she would say, well, I'm good at this and I'm good at that. And I said, well, don't worry about necessarily what you're good at. I said, if I can give you any advice, I was good at geography, so ended up doing an A-level in geography, but then hated it. So it's not necessarily what you're good at, it's what you enjoy and what you like. So what do you enjoy and what do you like? Well, I enjoy this and I like this. And I went, well, you know, go and do that. And all your GCSEs are kind of if you can imagine, you know, it's like a funnel, isn't it? And here's all of your different subjects that you've got to learn for the first few years of your high school life. And it's a step up from your primary school. And it's about spreading you. You've obviously got these, you know, maths and English, of course, and some of the sciences. But then as you get into GCSE, it's just like, right, out of all of that, what do I really enjoy? Right, well, I enjoy those. And then your A-levels, if you decide to do your A-levels, what do I enjoy out of the GCSEs the most? Right, well, it's those two. Right, until you get down to one thing. And then just, if you want to do a degree, do a degree. If you want to go and get a job, go and get a job. Just do what you enjoy, because while you have to be at school, you want to make it enjoyable. That's what and I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but we'll see.
Well, I think it's really interesting actually, because obviously I really care about education, which is why I was a school governor when I didn't need to be. So it's something else that I'm really passionate about. I think that when I was young, the fear of having no money from my parents drove everything. We weren't from a particularly well-off background. I grew up on a council estate in an old mining town. And I was born in the middle of the miners' strike, which will tell you how old I am, so I try not to work that out. But the fear of not having money drove all decision making, and it drove a lot of what was kind of the way that I was funneled into the decisions that I made when it came to education, because there was seemingly no alternative than to get a degree. Because if you didn't have a degree, you didn't get a good job, and if you didn't have a good job, you didn't have any money, and if you didn't have any money, you'd struggle to have anywhere to live. And it was this horrible like cadence of all the bad things that will happen if you don't go to university. And it's not like that now. And I think we as a civilization are very much more aware and open to the fact that you can make money doing anything, absolutely anything at all. There is money to be made, and there's absolutely loads of money in the world. It's just held by a few people. So that old mindset of it's absolutely imperative that you've got to go to university, it's just not true anymore. I'm looking at taking on an apprentice as a kind of junior project manager to support me. I have specifically said to the apprenticeship company that I'm really interested in people that have done a bit of hospitality and retail work, because they've got a customer focus. I don't care if they've got no A levels. I'm not interested. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can teach skills. You can teach skills easily, but it's what you are as a person and what you like and what you enjoy. That's the important thing. So yeah, there's plenty to go around when it comes to that kind of thing.
100% agree with you. 100% agree with you. It is about the person's beliefs and attitudes and how they act with other people. That's the most important thing. And that is a lovely time and part to end the podcast. Sarah, thank you so much for your time tonight. I really appreciate it. And we hope to have you back on. And of course, we welcome you as part of the Trueworth Collective. and we hope to help you find work in the future, to work with you in the future, deliver projects in the future, which I'm sure we'll do. And you've just started that journey, haven't you, as working for yourself and looking to sort of stand on your own 2 feet and have your own business. So we want to help facilitate that and make you successful.
Yeah, exactly that. No, that sounds great.
Listen, really appreciate it. Thank you again. And we'll love to have you back on a future episode.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me.
No worries. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam.
Bye for now.
See you soon.
Right.